Hi, everybody. A warm welcome to today's EMO Living Labs Colloquium. And today we'll be talking about AI translation in social impact contexts. So my name's Ashley Khor. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Pittsburgh, and I lead the Living Labs with Practitioners working group within EMO. So today's discussion will be bringing together practitioner and research perspectives to explore how multilingual AI systems are actually being used in practice, including in public serving and community-based contexts. And one thing we're especially interested in for today's session is moving beyond abstract conversations about AI for good towards the realities of implementation, evaluation, and governance under real world constraints. So we have a panel today inviting to bring different perspectives on the topic. So unfortunately, Marcie can't join us today, but we still have a good mix of practitioner and research perspectives, starting off with Nadine, who's from a nonprofit organization called Chin that delivers a multilingual services to survivors of gender-based violence, reaching over 400,000, I believe, Nadine, around the world. Would you like to share a few words about your role and what you do at Chen?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for including us on this panel, Ashley. We are a nonprofit, as Ashley said. We're a small team. I mean, we're like 11 to 12 core staff with another kind of 15 to 20 contractors. And we're based all over the world. So trying to bring that global perspective of gender-based violence happening everywhere and kind of bring together the themes. And really what we do uniquely is try and use technology to heal instead of harm. So it's kind of one of our missions as an organization to try and adapt to and adopt and utilize some of the latest technologies in order to make remote support services that can support survivors. And that's why this intersection between kind of multilingual, but also the technology and AI is so prominent for us.
Thank you. And we also have with us today Dr. Monojit Choudhury, who's a professor of natural language processing at MBZU AI. And Monojit, I think it was fascinating that your research in NLP goes beyond traditional accuracy metrics, where you're actually interested in looking at things like linguistic and cultural differences. Could you tell us a little bit more about what brought you into this line of research?
First of all, thanks a lot, Ashley and EAAMO, for inviting me today and giving me this opportunity to talk about something which I'm very passionate about. To give some context, I started working on so-called underrepresented or under-resourced languages back in I'm even trying to remember 2000, year 2000. So half a quarter of a century ago. And it all started with my PhD, and when I was looking at my own mother tongue, Bengali and Hindi, which is one of the biggest languages spoken in India and also around the world. And I was so surprised to see at that time that even a representation in Unicode was hard to find. There was so much, variance, and there was so little data and so on. Now, it has been a long journey since then. After that, I joined Microsoft Research after my PhD and continued working on low resource languages, especially Indian languages, because those are the languages we saw around us. And there were so much opportunity to build tools and serve people meaningfully in those languages. But unfortunately, nothing existed. And as we all know, data-driven technologies start with data. And there was so dearth of data, usable data, that it was a very uphill battle. Fast forward several years, almost like 20 years. So in 2020, we thought, uh, and I should tell a little bit here that even the research community, was not quite appreciative in those days of multilingual research, because it was considered that you should solve the problem for English and everything else just gets in as a, it works for English, so it will work for other languages. It's just the same technology, so you are not innovating anything. So in 2020, we wrote a paper showing, how much resources existed across various languages and the discrimination against maybe 80-90% of the world's languages in terms of not only nothing exists, but even if you want to publish research in a top venue in the world, it was such an uphill battle. And mind you, I'm talking of 2020, and 2018 or 17 was when Transformers came. So fairly late in the history that we are looking at. Yeah. And right now I'm a professor at Mohammed bin Zayed University of AI, where I joined 2.5 years ago, and I have been looking at. So I am happy to see that languages are quite, to some extent, well supported by our current technology. And a lot of people are working in this area, so there is also more effort. However, one part which even today is a big gap is culture, and because most of the models are so-called, within quote, Western centric. And that's another area that I have been looking at over the last 2 years. There are more things and a lot of interesting things that we can discuss, but let me stop here.
Thank you for the introduction. And I think that that's such a poignant thing that you brought up, that up until 2020, which, as you said, is remarkably recent, very, very little attention and recognition was given to non-English languages. And I think many topics, I think, particularly now that we have Nadine and you playing back and forth, and culture and localization and sensitivity is so important for Chen's work and survivors of gender-based violence. We love to hear about your perspective and how things have changed in the last 5 to 6 years, and what's really improved and what's missing. So wonderful to have both of you here with us today. I'll give a very quick introduction to Living Labs with Practitioners. We're a working group. We're fundamentally about co-experimenting, doing participatory work with social impact practitioners, revolving around the question of generative AI and what is safe enough. And this year, we are embarking on a new line of research to support refugee support practitioners with a translation guide for how they can use multilingual AI, when they should use it, and what are the risks involved. And in line with that, this is the reason why we're having the colloquium today, to bring everybody into this topic as well. And just to shout out to the wonderful working group members. And I think we have Nari here today. Nari, I think Philippe helped to make you a co-host. Would you like to just come on screen and say a few words about yourself and the refugee practitioner AI work that we're doing?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm so excited about this panel. So our group is a unique group of people with HCI researcher, computer scientist, and like NLP researchers, like across the board. And also I'm part of more practitioner side, since I'm from School of Social Work and social worker by training. For our refugee practitioner projects, we are collaborating with several organizations, both in the United States and South Korea. And it's the area of application with very urgent needs due to the recent huge cut up of funding after USAID closure. And it has impacted all of the international development organizations and refugee serving organizations. So they're experiencing huge need of like some like multilingual translation, as well as this like funding cuts and like low resource intersection. So we are focusing on this context and how like realistically we can support the organization rather than, okay, this is dangerous, so we should not use it, because they've been already using it to provide some urgent resources to people. So yeah, that's what we are doing. And yeah, thanks for coming to our session, everyone.
Thank you, Nari. And I love the point that Nari brings up as well, is that what we encounter a lot for those of you on the academic side is that best practice research and principles may say that multilingual AI shouldn't be used in humanitarian contexts, but the reality of funding cuts or sometimes even finding interpreters for low resource language means that we're pushed to the technologies. And this is where our working group looks into this space, which is how can we then support practitioners to use it more safely or give them a little bit more guidance in terms of what context and what the risks are? So, and that's really our topic that we'll be diving into for today. And we're looking to keep it kind of informal and dynamic. So the first half of the session will really be a roundtable format, but we've got a few questions and we'll pose to our panelists. But also we'll have time for audience Q&A as well. So if you do have questions, please do type them to the chat as we go, and or raise them during the Q&A session itself. So I'll stop sharing my screen and we can dive into the actual discussion itself. So we'll start off with just the opening context question. So to get us started, I'd love to ask our panelists how each of you are to briefly share about how multilingual AI systems have entered your work and what kinds of communication challenges you were trying to address. And Nadine, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So as I said at Chen, what we do is try and build services that support survivors globally. And our dream would be that language is no barrier to survivors accessing our services. But obviously across the years, and Chen's been around for kind of 10 years now, there's been limits to that. So we have essentially like a hub of resources online, and each of our resources is available in a different selection of languages. Sometimes that's appropriate to the content. So, for example, we've got guides in Urdu about how to set up a bank account without your husband knowing. That isn't really relevant to have in English because in the UK and in many like English speaking context that isn't so much of a barrier. So it's kind of varies based on the content, and it's also varied a lot according to which volunteers we've had around to translate them. Now with the advent of kind of AI and the an evolution from just a Google Translate kind of position, we've obviously got much more agency in whether we as a we work in English, that's our common language. So us as an English as a common language working team choose to then have those resources translated. So just a couple of practical examples. So one is that we've had a lot of content available that's kind of healing courses, healing video courses. And we have just localized those into Arabic and Turkish. So we started off with English. We did one translation process, localization process about 3 years ago to get them into Spanish, French, Portuguese, German, and Hindi. And we've just now run another localization process in Arabic and Turkish. And we've kind of made different decisions based on the technology that's been available to us. So in this instance, we haven't used AI to do a first pass for the various kind of safety reasons that come up. However, we believe that the translators, the localizers that we've used probably have. So that's kind of a point that we can come back round to. Then in other contexts, for example, when we are releasing changes to our platform, because our platform is available in those languages, French, German, Hindi, Portuguese. So when we are releasing a new kind of flow, we will use AI to translate the UX copy into the various different languages because our devs work in English, and then we'll use like a localization there. And then one last kind of example I'll give is on a tool that we built whilst on a project actually with the Living Labs group, which is using Gen AI to generate letters that request images are taken down from platforms that might be hosting non-consensual images. And for that flow, what we used is the ability to write or speech to text in theory, any language. And then the model that we've built will interpret that and we'll be able to return you the letter in English, which is what many of the tech platforms require. So there's kind of a few different instances there where we're coming across our those kind of multilingual elements to our services.
So you're a mute.
Thanks. And thanks for sharing this. And I think you've really shown the breadth of how multilingual AI translation may enter social impact work, from decisions about whether it's safe or not enough or not to use for user-facing content, to using it internally within a global team to communicate and reduce cultural barriers, and as well in exploring the new frontier of survivor-facing Gen AI tools itself. And so we'll love to dive more into those challenges across the panel. Now, Monojit, I think from the researcher perspective, looking into multilingual is your day-to-day bread and butter, but maybe share a bit about how your research impacts on multilingual AI systems.
Yeah, so there are a couple of different hats that I wear when it comes to multilingual research. Let me put it in this way that so one set of questions that are very interesting to me is, there's this general understanding that if we solve something very well for one language, ideally it should scale up as long as we have data. And this was quite, like I said earlier, until 2020, this was thought to be true. But with LLMs and with more data, it's more and more apparent that, there are more to it. First of all, often there is not enough data. And when there is even or isn't, different solutions might work. So one part of my research is to look at that aspect, let's say, if I take a language and I have only a very limited corpus, what's the best use of that corpus that I can build something useful? And if required, I will not rely on only one kind of technology, let's say large language models, but I would also like to use rule-based techniques on top of it and many other things, and we can make something useful. So that's one part. The second part is what I would call more evaluative and benchmarking sort of work. So often it's even not known that where things work and where they don't. So in that context, I'll give you two quick examples. One is we also looked at some healthcare studies. Actually, it's a known fact that, for instance, Google Translation, and now probably people use LLMs for this, doctors have been regularly using in geographies like the US or UAE, which has a lot of expats and immigrants, and people talk different languages, which the doctor may not know. And ideally, the prescription, the requirement is of a human translator in the loop, but often that's not available, or it's available after a lot of, there is a time delay. So doctors might quickly resort to that. So this is a known thing. So we were trying to see, how far it works. So we compared 5 languages, I think, Arabic, Hindi, and one of the language was always English, from which it was translated to, and Amharic and Tigrinya, 2 languages spoken in Ethiopia, or that around that part. And to our surprise, like while for Arabic and Hindi it was reasonable, for Amharic and Tigrinya, some of the translation errors were so bad that it could pose life risks, like the dosage amount was wrong and things like that. So that's another aspect. And similar studies we are right now doing in mental health, because chatbots are almost always go to places for, let's say, people who feel lonely or people who have specific questions about their mental health or physical health, especially on taboo topics like sexual health. And you get different answers if you ask in different languages. So those kind of evaluative work. And the third, which is very interesting and is getting more attention today, these days, is communities. I think any language survives, even in the digital space and the AI space, only if there is a community who pushes for it. I don't think it ever, we can just rely on, companies to just build the technology. For majority languages where there are big businesses and economies, yes. But for other cases, my experience has been it is always the communities. So then it's a very interesting question about how these communities come together, how they are mobilized, and they work around a common topic, a common cause to build corpus and so on. One great example of that has been Masakane community in the Africa, where they all are volunteers coming together to build corpora and so on. So and there are similar work in India and in Australia, Australian Aboriginal languages, and so on. So studying that. So I would put those three as the pillars or lenses that I use to look at the progress that we are making in the multilingual space, where the gaps are, and what might be the solution, not only the technical, but the socio-technical solution.
Thank you so much, Monojit. And I think that what you shared would resonate a lot with Nadine as well, because particularly in the context that Chen is operating in with gender-based violence and sensitive content, there really isn't that corpus of data available to train models because of the sensitive nature. And so that already gives you the disposition that there will be risk in using technologies because that context hasn't gone into the training data set. And that links us, I think, to continue to talk about how I think what we're seeing, this theme that comes up is that systems can work well in some contexts and much less well in others. And maybe we can dive in a bit more about where current systems are effective and where challenges or risks still emerge. So, Monojit, maybe we'll start with you for this one, because I think what you've already shared so far is there is a difference between high and low resource languages, and that there are certain sensitive areas like healthcare and mental health. Where results are showing up in the research that the quality can have real impacts on people's lives. So I guess my question would be for you, since you said that's been a change in the last 5 years, and particularly, an example for things, languages like Hindi, which in the past could have been a low resource language, but really is a language spoken by a large majority of the world's population. Have you seen a shift in some low resource languages moving to high resource languages, or perhaps as well developments in the technology where perhaps 10 years ago that it wasn't well done, but today that we've seen some improvements?
Mm-hmm. Certainly, yes. I would let me give some concrete statistics here. So when we had done the study in 2020 about how much resources are there in different languages, and by resources we mean content on the internet, or both like labeled data as well as unlabeled data. Unlabeled is any content. Of course, it has to be reasonable quality. And labeled would be anything which can be used also for evaluation or more specific training, because you have both the question and the answer. So sort of. Now, in 2020, what we had seen, where there were 7 languages, starting with English, but also I'm just trying to recollect. There was Russian, German, maybe Spanish, and Chinese, which had so much resources in both the dimensions that they could be, they were the gainers. The most benefits went to these languages from the LLM revolution, or the generative AI revolution. But there were also these group of languages like Hindi, which was much behind earlier in this race. But because Hindi had a lot of digital content online and generative AI could use it, and there was also a national level push for many of these languages, they quickly gained prominence. So Hindi fell in that category, and there were probably another 5 or 6 languages there. And then there was this third language where a third category where my own mother tongue comes in, Bengali. And that category of languages we call the rising stars. So these are the languages which were very data impoverished earlier, but with the generative AI revolution, what happened was we could now use even little bit of unlabeled data to build something. So we call them rising stars because for them we would see the maximum jump from what was earlier there and what we can do now. And if I recollect, there were 28 such languages and spoken by around 1 billion people. So indeed, it is a good population, and because these 28 languages are spoken by a lot of people. So that's the good news. The bad news is now beyond this, it tapers off very quickly, and 88% of the world's languages spoken by around 1.2 billion people had zero digital presence. So, which would mean you cannot do anything with the data-driven technologies for them unless you create data. And creating data at that scale is simply impossible. So that was one big challenge. And I would say Amharic and Tigrinya falls in not that 88% where there's no resource, but much below the rising stars as well. So that's why we see such a big gap for these languages. So this was one major point. This is one major point I wanted to mention. The other is in terms of domains, even when a language is supported, let's say Bengali or let's say Amharic to some extent, Tigrinya is much less supported than Amharic by these, cutting edge systems. Even there, if you ask, questions specific to the geography, and by geography, I don't mean geographical elements, but let's say the culture, how certain mental health conditions are referred to, or how certain agricultural, practices are referred to if you want to provide support on agricultural advisory, for instance, then you see that the performance gap is again huge. And it is much more than, the gap that you would otherwise notice if you ask that just math questions, for instance. So there are these two levels of gap, I would say.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Nadine, I'd love to hear your perspective as well. And I think in the case of the sensitive context that you work in, you can talk about it broadly as well, whether it's using AI systems or human translators. Where do you find that translation work tends to go easier, and where are the areas that is challenging to translate?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many things that Monojit has already mentioned there that have come up for us in a kind of practical scenario, because obviously we're essentially, as a small non-profit organization, we are reliant on the kind of work and development that Monojit and people like you are doing in order to facilitate us to provide the best support, right? So on the kind of usage end of some of those NLPs and models, I guess one thing that you'd mentioned there was the cultural nuance. That is huge for us. And so we were always aware as an organization that translating wasn't what we wanted to do here. We wanted to localize a lot of our resources. So as I mentioned, 3 years ago, when we first localized our English course content, and I'm talking about these sessions around kind of handling feelings of guilt and shame, or deciding how you want to, or if you want to tell somebody about an abuse or an assault that has occurred. We did essentially give it to people to translate at the beginning. And even though we said, can you localize it? and we didn't actually hire translators at that time. We decided to hire activists, people who knew the context of their area of the regions that they were working in and would apply that. But it's really difficult when you put something in front of somebody for them not to kind of go line by line and try and methodically do it right. And so this time round, when we were localizing into Arabic and into Turkish, we actually took a different approach where we asked people to read through the content and then not look at it, put it at one side, and just kind of rewrite what they had understood in their own native language. Now, of course, this creates complications because us as a like common language English speaking team, we then have to find other third parties to kind of review that and cross-reference and check that. And that is an area where then AI can come into place, right? Is that if we've got the actual work done by humans, can AI actually be the form of checking rather than the more common model people think about, which is let's make AI do it and then have a kind of human moderator in the loop. And so that's kind of one example where we've been thinking about how we can do that. And when it comes to cultural nuance, as well as you were mentioning, so AI and translation can go so far as to literally translate the context of what's been said, but we include quite a lot of cultural references in our content. So we talk about popular culture TV shows, we refer to films to kind of give examples of where we might see toxic relationships playing out or where we might see gaslighting happening. And for that, we need AI can't do that yet. You know, unless you're giving it very specific prompts, it can't read something in a reliable way for us, even having said for us, and find some relevant cultural examples in the language we've set you in. It's not there yet. So that is really where we always need the human intervention at that moment. And just another example, actually, to go to where we haven't had human intervention, for example, is I'll just share this blog. So back probably 7 years ago now, Chen did actually build a chatbot. We attempted to build a chatbot, and then we took the decision to take it down about a year later because it didn't have a human in the loop. And we basically felt like it was creating more harm than it was creating help. And one example of that was the struggle that the NLP at the time had with processing kind of like English multilingual mashups, I guess I would call them, of words that people speak to in the chatbot because they're speaking very colloquial, in a very colloquial way. So an example is there was quite a lot of uses of the term nickified. Nikah being a term used in Pakistan to refer to a kind of arranged marriage, and fied being an English suffix that you use to kind of show that something is happening to somebody. So of course, nickified is not being picked up. That's not being registered somewhere in some of these language systems about this is the language people are using. But if you say that in Pakistan, you will be understood. So it's not only just about the individual languages, but it's about like how diasporas are then using those languages. And we see this most, of course, with English, and then apply it to their own cultural contexts that mean for us, it's so important to have that human in the loop who is from Pakistan in order to be able to interpret very quickly what's going on there. And, we also see this happen even within languages themselves. Why am I being forced to do something? We can actually read that as, okay, this is actually a rape situation. But being forced to do something is not something that might be caught by, let's say, like guardrails to say, oh, this is a serious case, because all of that wording is very, is nuanced, essentially.
I think that's such an interesting examples that you're sharing, Nadine, and in the case as well about whether you call it slang or just how people might talk in day-to-day language. And that got me to think about it's that one way that LLMs have picked this up in English could be perhaps because they are trained on so much Reddit data. And in the future, the question is if there are, forums like Reddits that go into the training of language models, then that would be the future of how they start to actually understand how people talk in real life. But this also ties back, I think, to Monojit's excellent point, which is the question about which languages are going in into training of the models, and that emphasis. Then when we might see that moving target, like Monojit said, there might be rising stars where they do have digitalized content that LLMs can learn from, which represent breakthroughs in the technology. But Nadine, I think you've also given us a real look into what quality actually means in the case. And I love the way that you put it, that especially if the goal is not just merely translation, which is a word for word, but actual localization as well. And on the topic of quality, Monojit, you mentioned earlier that one of the challenges is that I think when it comes to context sensitive work, that there are might not even be benchmarks or standards available in terms of assessing what translation quality looks like. Could you expand on that a little bit more?
Sure, but before that, I want to thank Nadine for bringing that beautiful example of Nicafied, because so linguistically it would be called code mixing, where code means languages, and you are mixing elements of multiple languages. And frankly, if you look at South Asia or even many other parts like Northern Africa, nobody speaks a single language. Everybody will always mix languages. And for a very, very long time, all NLP technologies totally failed on catching those things. And in fact, 8 years at MSR, I would say from 2012 till 2020, we had a big team working on different aspects of code mixing. And it's a fascinating topic as a researcher because there's so much of creativity going on in how people choose to mix and mix on what basis. It's not random at all. I mean, when people are using these words, but and there was actually another study. It reminds me there, and it's about vulnerable populations. So that's why it also ties back to Nadine's point that children, teenagers especially, not children, like teenagers from slum areas of Mumbai, after they got introduced to social media, I don't know whether it was WhatsApp or Facebook or what, probably Facebook, they were chatting to, teenagers in Brazil. But these guys didn't know English or Portuguese, and those guys didn't know Hindi or English. So they were creating their own language. And when we were looking at the data, it was fascinating that, what kind of inventions they were doing. And the communication was successful, but it also has other kinds, forms of dangers. And if you suppose want to, have a, again, going back to another related example, there was a WhatsApp group for peer-to-peer connection for HIV positive mothers in I think Kenya, and they were talking in Swahili, but also mixing a lot of English and Sheng. And sometimes when they post a query, that query might be very urgent to respond to, right? But it's a peer-to-peer group. It's not like people asking medical queries or very important topics in general, but sometimes it might be about a domestic violence or any form of violence and they need a urgent help, or it might be a medical condition they're describing. And we wanted to just build a very simple, and again, I'm talking of post-Gen AI era, so 2022 maybe, or 2021, a simple tool which will just flag, that this conversation might be sensitive and require urgent attention. But it doesn't work for Sheng or even Swahili that well. And when people start mixing these things, it just all goes haywire. So thanks for bringing that example. And very briefly on the quality issue, I think while a lot of digital data is available in some languages like Hindi, or let's say, I want to take another example, Telugu, which is spoken in southern India and spoken by a lot of people. It's probably the 10th most spoken language in the world or so. But the quality of data, for instance, in Wikipedia is so poor because what happens is it's mostly already translated data. and the translators themselves are not good. And then when you train a model using that kind of data, it's all over the place. So until recently, some of the South Indian languages like Tamil and Telugu, even the scripts were all mixed up when LLMs were generating, responses in those languages. So I think getting the right quality is super important, not only, and sometimes human is the only solution. Human in the loop is the only solution given the current state of the technology. But I think a bigger problem is also LLMs do not tell you when they are unable to give you the right quality response. I think that's a big gap. So LLMs will very confidently generate, like we call it hallucination, but I don't like the term, especially in this context. Probably that's not the right term, but it's just giving an answer without saying that, by the way, I have very less confidence on what is being generated.
I think it raises such a good point about the broad danger of LLMs in this era that they are persuasive and they speak confidently. And as Nadine said as well, even if you're asking them to localize, human translators to localize, and you give them a copy of English, they tend to follow it and translate it rather than localize. And that could also be the risk that if you have an LLM generated version that people may not pick things up because you have something that looks credible and seemingly fluent enough on you. Perhaps the trick then comes when you come to where that the languages have scripts, and then if something's all mixed up, then that becomes a very obvious error to human translators. But otherwise, it may not be so noticeable, particularly since more sensitive things like cultural references, which are really difficult to pick up as well. We have had such a fascinating topic so far. I still have a couple more questions in my pocket, but keeping an eye on the time, I wanted to give the opportunity to the audience to jump in as well. So I think that you're free to either type any questions that you have in the chat box, or if you want to come on screen as well. I think if you put your hand up, we have Philippe here from the organizer team who can help to give you access to come on screen as well. Any questions from the audience? Okay, to give you some time to think about it, maybe I'll pose another question. But while we're talking, feel free to post things in the chat or to raise your hand as well. And let's see, what's a good one to talk about?
I actually have a question for Nadine. Thanks for sharing your experience. It's so interesting and fascinating. And from the perspective of the client seeking for help, I think generative AI is very unique in the because it's so accessible to anyone, even for older adults who have never used the technology. After they try it out several times, they can use it very easily because of their chatbot feature. So, like going back to my points, like about from the client's perspective, if the nonprofit close the kind of chatbot option or that has existed, or they decided not to do it, I think clients can go very easy to the commercial chatbots without any like screening or support. So it's very different situation from my experience. Like also I worked with several programs before the era of Gen AI. If the organization closed the program because it's not kind of sustainable or if it's not safe enough, and then clients just like not to use it anymore, or they might seek different kind of help. But this is quite unique that they can go very easily to like just commercial chatbot without any guidance and screening. So I think what is like kind of like worst case scenario, like even if it's difficult to like screen everything, it might be better to have them on the side of nonprofits so that we can at least refer them to other organization, or we can at least have the data of them, because big tech companies, they might be more reluctant to sharing that chat log because they're now experiencing some lawsuits related to the harms. So I'm just wondering about your thoughts. It's really difficult to like decide between what is like realistic and what if it close and do not provide it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a kind of the question that so many organizations are asking themselves. And I think we're lucky at Chen in that we're a smaller charity. So the kind of red tape that we experience, or let's say the fear that is often generated with technologies that aren't fully understood because the teams are not technologists at their core, we're able to kind of overstep a little bit of that. But I'll give you an example. We're working at the moment with a big nonprofit on a partnership project where they want to equip their aid workers who are working in humanitarian contexts with knowledge about complex technology facilitated abuse that is happening. So we're talking about people who are being tracked or who think that their devices might be compromised or who have images or kind of hacking things. And a lot of the frontline workers who work for this charity just don't have the knowledge to kind of answer those questions, right? So we're thinking, okay, what's the solution for them? Now, granted, it's one step removed from the user because this is an aid worker who's coming to this technology service. But we're talking about building a forum essentially where we've got these tech experts who they can post a question and tech experts can write back their answer. And this is something we piloted just using Stack Overflow, right, to see the kind of dynamic. Now, the tech experts will take anywhere between 8 to 24 hours probably to reply to a query. So we're then left with the question of what's better to try and wait till a tech expert comes and replies to that, considering that there's a wait, or to surface something immediately that's from AI. And if we surface a Gen AI response, is it better that we do that because we are able to put in place certain checks and balances that not only make suggestions like please do not share any survivor personal data here, but also for our own Gen AI to not use minimizing language, to be trauma informed in its responses, to not use re-traumatizing kind of patterns of response. Or because we can't ensure that, is it better to just not include that layer? But we kind of know that the tech volunteer experts are probably going to use just Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT without all of those kind of attempts at safety checks in there. So I don't know if that answers your question there, Nari, but this is the constant trade-off, right? Is like, what level of safety are we willing to risk essentially in the knowledge that user behavior, any users, or it's so accessible that people are likely to be using the raw versions of these Gen AI platforms. And so, yeah, with the chatbot, we decided that that was one side of our red line. But there's other examples. For example, this Gen AI tool we use that creates letters based on a survivor's story, essentially of non-consensual image sharing, where we said, it's not 100% and we don't have a human in the loop. So, there's risks around that, but the risk is worth taking for the benefit that can give survivors. And basically, as far as I'm aware, and speaking a lot to other actors in the industry here, everyone is constantly trying to figure out what those red lines are for their organizations and for their nonprofits.
I think that's I think a great insight and very in line with our belief as well that if you have very black and white statements, like don't use it, in this case, people may use it anyway, but not have any kind of safeguards. And that's, I think, the area that we're interested to explore. I'm not saying that we know in advance what all the safeguards are, but the belief that it's in and it goes back to what Monojit says as well, that communities need to push for it. But if you have, for example, in the gender-based violence space, if people start to build prompting practices, responsible practices, and collect this, then more people become aware to try it out, and then more gets chipped in. And that's how I think we can develop it, knowing that I think particularly in niche areas, like again, as Monojit mentioned, if there isn't training data for this, if it's not a high priority area, it's not something that we can assume that LLMs are going to do well. And with the examples that we've heard, when they get it wrong, they're persuasive, but they can get it very wrong. Even something like getting a dosage, medical dosage correct, and that can have real human consequences. Yeah.
And just to add to that, actually, something I didn't mention before. So when we've been localizing our resources into different languages, one part of the process that has been essential is creating a shared glossary between the people who are doing the localizing, not only to make sure we have a kind of more homogenized tone of voice and communication in between our sessions and everything, but also because there's a lot of questions that come up about how we refer to terms, how certain terms are translated. There's many we found, for example, with Hindi, there we could translate the term gaslighting, but that's not really how people talk about it. In Hindi, people just say gaslighting in English, and so like, do we include that in our text? Now, I'm not saying that we our community-driven glossary is necessarily sufficient training data, but it's kind of like, how do we create these resources and make sure there is a lot of that also being flooded on the internet so that the generative AI is using that to learn from as well.
It is, I think, a great initiative that you're doing, and your last point as well, Nadine, as well, is that organizations working in this space have even some form of a start to the glossary. Actually, just putting it online contributes to the global knowledge of humans and of AIs as well. Monojit, anything that you wanted to add?
Totally agree, especially this gaslighting example, right? Again, going back to what I was saying earlier. So often trying to push for a sanitized vocabulary doesn't make sense, and we should keep it to how people talk about it, because that's how people will ask questions or talk about it. And therefore, the community-driven approach is probably the only way to go here, where you crowdsource. And it's a different form of crowdsourcing, like not the usual way people think about crowdsourcing, but I think this is very important. Like in another effort on agriculture in the advisory for the Global South, we have seen very similar thing. In fact, a very interesting study showed that how women ask questions versus how men ask questions are different in agriculture. We're not even talking of like more social, but even there, for instance, men tend to know more of and this was a study done in India, more like the standard market vocabulary, let me call it that way. For instance, they would know a term like fertilizer or pesticide, but women usually did not know those terms, and they would refer these same concepts by other terms. And it will be important to have both, right? If you're creating a glossary.
That is fascinating, even in something that but I think that kind of makes sense as well, that particularly in agriculture, in a more technical field, some people may know the technical terms, and some people may, like you said, come up or co-mixing or come up with terms that make sense in their context. And that's one of the trickiest things, I think, to navigate. We've had a great panel today. I'm going to fire one last lightning round question for panelists to share. What's one thing that you wish people better understood about multilingual AI in practice? And what's one thing that you will take away from today's session? And I'll go first myself. I think really appreciate both of you taking the time today. I think my greatest appreciation is really hearing those rich little details of what's actually happening with real examples that I think really brings to life some of these things that we may think about, but the examples really, I think, make it come to life. And my big takeaway, I think, from this is that technology is fallible, but using humans, even human interpreters or tech experts, also comes in with challenges as well, where they may be using AI or quality is not necessarily guaranteed. And then how can we bring both humans and technology into place to get towards better outcomes iteratively over time? For your final takeaways, I'll leave it up to you. Who wants to go first?
Okay, I can go first. And for me, I mean, of course, this conversation has been fascinating, and those nuances are great. One interesting observation, because of course I do have some idea about work done in the intersection of socially relevant and humanitarian causes, but then the use cases that I heard today from Nadine, for instance, I would not have thought of using Gen AI in those contexts. So, in other words, the takeaway for me is, as a model builder, because I also build models sometimes, we don't think of what a wide variety of cases people can use them for. And that's something very important to think about when we build the guardrails, when we generate the right kind of safety messages. And the second takeaway I would say is it's at the end always like working with what works, and therefore getting the humans in the loop at the right places, including the community at the right places, is going to be ultimately always the solution that works. Yep.
Yeah, really good reflections there. I think from my side, it's been very kind of inspirational and hopeful to hear particularly examples of how Monojit, maybe people like him, are working on this topic and are really like making sure, championing the work that we feel needs to be done in order to make more global equity in terms of accessing support services or even technology. And so, yeah, I found that very inspirational, I must say. And it's been a good reminder of these small details, small decisions that we're making kind of as we build products, the kind of wider context of where they can fit in. It might feel sometimes futile because it's just our little thing with, our few hundred users, but it contributes to a broader picture of how language and technology are kind of intersecting.
Absolutely. And we've come up onto the hour. And thank you, Nadine. Thank you, Monojit, for spending the time and sharing these wonderful insights with us, and to everyone who was able to join in as well. I hope you found the session meaningful. I've dropped a note in the comment as well. If you're interested in continuing with this trajectory, feel free to reach out to our Living Labs with Practitioners Working Group as we start to dive into attempting to see how we can help to make a difference for refugee practitioners trying to use translation with all kinds of languages, high resource, low resource languages in the future, and towards building responsible Gen AI prompting practices as well. Thanks again, everybody.